Welcome to GRE Snacks, snackable episodes about the GRE exam and graduate school admissions. I'm Tyler, founder of Achievable. Our affordable $199 GRE course includes everything you need to ace your GRE. A full textbook, tons of GRE questions backed by a memory-enhancing algorithm, and full-length practice exams. You can try it out for free at achievable.me, and if you like it, the code podcast gets you 10% off at checkout. Now, today I've got a really fun guest on the line, Vince Kotchian. And Vince is the founder of a test prep company focused on the GRE after his namesake. And I'll let him introduce himself.
Hey, Tyler, thanks for having me. Yep, my name is Vince Kotchian, and I own Vince Kotchian Test Prep. So I've been a GRE tutor since 2008. Some of my claims to fame, I've made a video course for LinkedIn for the GRE, co-written books for Barron's, created some GRE apps. I have a GRE app for vocab cartoons and another one that's called GRE Math Night. And I actually teach on the GregMap platform, and I'm super active on the GRE Reddit. So GRE prep is basically all I do all day long, and it's good to be here to chat about it with another GRE professional.
Yeah, thanks so much. Now, today, this was a topic that you had a lot to say about, which I'm excited for, which was how to build a study plan. And I think that, first off, building a study plan is something that if you, the listener, are maybe starting your GRE journey, or even if you're partway through it and you kind of haven't built a plan, you really should. Having any plan is better than none, but then Vince here is going to share how to build a really effective one. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, the more organized you can be with your prep, the better. The one thing I'll say about study plans, to just kind of preface it, is, you're eventually going to hopefully have a study plan. But you also have to be flexible with it, because inevitably, one-size-fits-all study plan might not be the perfect plan for you. And that's what I see a lot, where people are pretty good about finding a study plan online, but then they try to follow it, and a lot of times the problem is that they can't keep up with it, and they get discouraged, or they get behind, and suddenly they're off track, they're confused. So I think you have to go into any study plan, or really any plan in life, right, with a anticipation that maybe you're going to have to change or alter that plan as time goes on. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that as I get into it, but let's think about the study plan in terms of maybe 3 layers. The first layer I'm going to talk about is like the foundation layer. So if we're thinking about the GRE, the foundation layer for the GRE is you have to know vocab. You have to be able to read complicated passages. You have to understand the math concepts that the GRE is going to test. Arithmetic, algebra, geometry, data analysis. This is kind of like being able to speak the language of the GRE. And we have to make sure that you're generally speaking, everybody's got a little different levels with these foundational layers. Almost everybody has to study vocab, so that's going to be an easy daily task to kind of add to your study plan. Study vocab. There's a variety of ways to do it. Many people are going to need to work on their reading ability, but many people aren't. I see it's a pretty broad spectrum. Many people can read just fine, and in terms of the kinds of material the GRE will test. Others, particularly people who maybe didn't like to read as they grew up, or grew up in a different country where English wasn't used very much, are going to have to work on their reading ability. And the best way I know of to do that is to read, similar material to the GRE. And this can be found, a lot of different publications. There's a free one that I like to recommend called Arts and Letters Daily. It's aldaily.com. And it's just sort of sophisticated articles about a bunch of different things. We want to just get used to reading and focusing, on sophisticated material. So that's another foundational piece. The complicated foundational piece for a lot of people is quant. So we know there's all these quant concepts. Some people, let's think about a spectrum. Some people have never learned them. Some people know them or just kind of remember them because they were very good at them in school. And most people are going to fall in between. So we have to figure out a way to teach those people those quant concepts, because before we throw them into GRE practice, we need to make sure they, again, speak the language. They're going to get really frustrated if we throw them into GRE practice test or practice set, and they can't remember, 60% of the concepts in the questions. They're going to have a really hard time.
So and there's just a lot of formulas on the geometry side in particular too that are just like things you learned in high school and then you just like never use again, and then you're like, wait, what is isosceles triangle side length again? Like so it's good to get all that foundational layer first.
Yeah, and that's really the complaint. It's been a long time since I used it. It was back in high school. I didn't do it for the past 5 to 10 years. And understandably, like a lot of people have forgotten a lot of this stuff because it's not super relevant to, life. Not a lot of isosceles triangle real life situations you're running into. So that's a big piece of it. So that foundational layer this is where, one of the things that I do for my clients is make customized study plans so that they can kind of be as efficient as possible with this. But if you're if you're just listening to the podcast and you're like, okay, how do I tackle this foundation layer? I'll give you a couple of ideas or premises to do that, and I'll recommend a couple of resources too. Number one, we have to make sure that we go through the ETS math review. So the ETS math review is a PDF that's free online, and it's basically kind of a list with a brief description of each topic that the GRE can test. And it just kind of outlines all the typical topics, from arithmetic to algebra to geometry to data analysis. And what you can do is just read through that entire document. For certain topics, you might just need a refresher on them, and just reading the document might be good enough to kind of teach them to you. Like maybe you just forgot how to add fractions and you needed a quick reminder. And then you'll probably find some other topics in there that you have no idea how to do, or you just know that you're going to need somebody to teach you them. So we usually find that it's a little messy. Sometimes certain people will know certain topics and not other topics. Sometimes people will know most of them, but not a few of them. And we have to kind of take stock of that because the topics that you don't know or you feel like you need a lesson on, you're going to need to go get a lesson on from somewhere. Now, this is where we're still not quite at the level of GRE prep. We're still trying to solve this foundational layer. And the way that I usually tell people how to do that is, we've got a few different options. We've got free tools like Khan Academy to watch videos and
I was going to mention them.
Easy level exercises. Khan Academy, you can just kind of go onto Khan Academy and like type in the name of the topic or the concept that you're interested in for math, and then you can like find a video, you can find exercises, you can jump straight into some practice with it. My big tip for Khan Academy is that you want to just jump into the practice because you might be able to fight your way through it, and you might not have to watch like 8 videos in order to be able to do it. Now, if you need to go watch the videos, go ahead and do it, and it'll walk you through it from basically square one. But if you can be a little more efficient and watch fewer videos, it's going to save you time. I have a guide on my website about how to use Khan Academy for the GRE Quant, but it's not super hard. It's like, okay, look at the math review, look at the topics in there, figure out which ones you need work on, go into Khan Academy, look them up, watch videos and do the exercises to the point where you convince yourself, hey, I can do this topic at this point at an easy level on Khan Academy. A couple other sources I'd like to recommend because I think a lot of people can go a little quicker than Khan Academy. There's a book I like. It's actually for the GMAT. It's called Manhattan Prep Foundations of GMAT Math. And I like it's the same math as on the GRE. For some reason, it's better than their GRE version of the same book. And it's just kind of a very down-to-earth explanation of most of the math concepts on the GRE. The other resource I like, and I think is gaining more traction as people find out more about it, is Greg Matt, who's another GRE tutor. He has a platform called gregmatt.com, and he has a quant concepts series on there. And it's going to take quite a bit longer to get through because it's video-based. However, it's got some exercises, and it's kind of from the perspective of a GRE tutor, which is nice. So this is all stuff I'm trying to get people to think about early on to make sure that they can get up to speed with the quant concepts. And that's really step one before we really get them to do too much quant. So think about that. All of that is like your foundational layer
Hmm.
to your prep. Now you're going to
Right.
continue.
And how much, sorry, just before you move on, how much time would you allocate for that? Let's say, it's January and you're starting your GRE prep, you're going to take it this year,
Mhm.
right? So you got plenty of time. And hopefully, I mean, if you don't have plenty of time, then maybe you're compressing all of this timeline. But in a perfect world, like how much time would you try to allocate for getting the foundational stuff really solid?
And I think and when we say that, we're mostly talking about quant because that's really the most time consuming piece. Um, really anywhere from, I'd say, 1 to 2 months, let's say. Some people
Hmm.
might be, that's kind of like the sweet spot of the bell curve. Some people are longer than that, some people are shorter. But I think most people can kind of get through all that stuff pretty well within a month or two. Um,
Yeah,
just
I'd be worried
ballpark.
about it being longer because I feel like you'd start to forget what you learned at the beginning of month four. Or
Yeah, and
sorry, in month one, you'd forget it by month four potentially.
you're also going to lose motivation probably if you're like most people. It's like nobody wants to like spend that long studying for the test. We do see people do it though, but it's usually not just like that long of a foundational period. However, if you are that
Hmm.
person who barely got through high school, you might need longer. And you might need to
Right.
review as you go and so on.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So let's pretend we're kind of at the end of that period now, and we're like, okay, we got all the quant down. Usually, the good news is for the jury is that the verbal section and the analytical writing sections are pretty easy to get up to speed with in terms of how much time they're going to take you. Um,
Hmm.
so we can afford to spend all this time on quant initially because in the back of our mind, we're like, okay, it's only going to take me really a month or two to get up to my potential in those other sections. So now let's get into the category of let's start to practice for the test and get used to some GRE problems. And this is where we're going to kind of start to learn strategies for verbal and math. Almost everybody, is going to learn those strategies from videos. And then they're going to practice questions. So this is where we get into practice. A lot of times we like to start off untimed, really with a focus on accuracy. There's always
Hmm.
the temptation to do a lot of questions, but it's not going to do you very much good to do a lot of questions and then get a bunch of them wrong. You want to be accurate from the get-go and take more time as needed to be accurate. So you're doing
Hmm.
questions, let's say from verbal. Um, for quant, a lot of times you can start to do some realistic questions from ETS, but I like people to get more repetition with another source first. Usually that's going to be a book like the Manhattan 5-Pound book, famous book, which has, tons and tons of GRE problems. Most, of course, online GRE courses are going to have something similar in the online course where people can get
Hmm.
repetition with a concept. But this is good because now they're gonna be a little more versatile. Yeah, they understand the concept, but they need to see it from all kinds of different angles to be really good at it. So we spend a lot of
Yeah, and to
time.
be prepared for like what I call composite questions, which sometimes pop up where there's like multiple concepts buried.
Yeah,
So you got to see it from a lot of angles.
yeah, and there's really think of the process. I usually tell people think of the process as accumulation. At this point, we're not memorizing things. We're not going to forget things. We're just going to build up our database of things we've seen. And like Tyler
Hmm.
says, if you have this big, you're to react to a composite question where there's three different concepts in it, you need to have this big database of questions you've done to be able to react better to it. So
Hmm.
this is a stage that is a pretty finite stage. We do all that practice with the 5-pound quant or whatever other quant source, and then this blends into the third phase or layer of our pyramid that we're constructing here, which is realistic ETS questions. ETS is the company that makes the GRE, so we want to do all their practice material, especially all their practice tests. So this is where we kind of
Hmm.
finish up our plan. We're doing ETS stuff. We're doing things timed, and we're doing mixed practice with random questions thrown at us under time pressure. And this is getting us used to the kind of behavior we're going to have to use on the real exam. Not only making us more versatile with handling different styles of questions, but being able to adapt and when we see new things, because inevitably the real test will have different packaging around the same kinds of questions. So this is where we're kind of practicing our performance and spending a lot of time analyzing questions as well, because that's, the real thing. We want to deeply understand how those questions work, maybe find better ways to do them, and use an error log to kind of keep track of our mistakes.
Right. And so all in, kind of assuming 1 to 2 months for phase 1, how much time would you benchmark for phase 2 and phase 3?
I would also say probably 1 to 2 months for a grand total of, anywhere from 2 to 4 months. I think that's kind of the sweet spot for most people. And, if you're listening to this, you might, assume that that's you. It may or may not be you, but probably it is you. It's going to be, you can kind of hit a reasonable potential within that amount of time on the test for most people.
Yeah. And then, between phase 2 and 3, where you're switching to like doing the real ETS practice tests, like how much time do you allocate for phase 3? Is it kind of the last 2 weeks, or is it like the last month and you're going backwards to revisit stuff that you're struggling with on the real test?
Yes, that's a good question, because we definitely don't want to compress it too much. You definitely need a lot of time to get used to ETS, and we want to probably start it at least. It's not going to, even 1 month is a bit too short, because you probably want to space out the practice test pretty evenly over that last layer. In other words, like if you're taking 5 practice tests, you want to have at least 5 weeks to take them over. But I like to kind of stack most of the time practice at the end of the prep, because by then you know what you're doing. And over that last, let's say, 6 weeks, you get into a rhythm of taking a test every weekend. You know what you're doing, so you're building confidence and you're doing well. I don't like people to use the test too early, because it's a bit of a waste if you don't know what's coming and you don't know how to deal with it. So I usually tell people, if you want to get a diagnostic test, use a third-party diagnostic, not an official test. Because
save those, because you only have 5, right?
Yeah, there's only 5, which kind of sucks, and they're gonna be the very first one you take, it'll be a shock to the system, so you don't really want to use an ETS test for the very first test you take, if possible.
Yeah, that's good advice. And then on the so you mentioned there's just like a little tidbit I pulled out, which is, you said you want to get used to taking a test every week. So would you say like your last 5, or let's say your last 6 weeks before the exam, you're basically like, let's say you schedule your real GRE, like the actual exam, for Saturday, and then like the previous 5 Saturdays, you're doing your practice test every time at the same time? Is that kind of like the ideal situation?
Yeah, I think that would be pretty ideal, because then, you are, getting your brain and body used to that kind of performance every Saturday. And it's allowing enough time between tests to kind of analyze your mistakes and correct them and work on things throughout the week. Yeah, so that's a pretty good scenario. It can be stacked. It can be spread apart a little farther than that. There's nothing magical about once a week. It could be once every 2 weeks if you have a little more time. But generally speaking, that's kind of the pattern that I usually have people follow.
Great. This is all really, really helpful stuff. Anything else that you wanted to cover before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, let me ask you this, Tyler. What do you think? You're not going to know the answer to this, but just take a guess. What do you think the biggest problem is that people like me see with people following a study plan?
They fall behind and they stop doing it.
Yeah.
Just like me and my workouts.
Yeah. Think about something you do. Yeah, exactly. Think about something or I should think about something I do that I slack off on, that I don't want to do. And it's like, yeah, the number one problem is motivation. So think about that before you start your study plan. Get an accountability partner, get a study buddy, get another human other than yourself to be accountable to, and just kind of be like, you know what, I'm going to text you, I don't know, every Saturday and tell you what I did that week, or I'm going to text you every day and tell you what I worked on that day, just so you have somebody else involved that you've kind of made a promise to. And it's just going to be a little more powerful than trying to motivate yourself. And maybe tell a bunch of people and just try to build up some social support for the project, because it's a long-term project. You're probably already busy. It's not going to be fun. and
Yeah.
you're probably not gonna, you're not gonna enjoy studying. So you're gonna have to make yourself do it sometimes, and that's gonna take discipline and motivation. So however you can sort of hack that, think about that ahead of time.
Yeah. So two hacks that I just use in general. The first is like time boxing. So just like setting time aside on your calendar that you block off and you kind of have to do it. Right. And I mean, don't do like Friday night every week unless you really don't expect to ever go out Friday night. But like be realistic with your time boxing, right? Call it, Tuesdays and Thursdays from 5 to 8. The second thing also is probably just to be realistic about how long this is actually going to take. I would say, I don't know, ballpark anywhere from 50 to 100 total hours of studying is like a good amount. That varies a lot by person, but it's like, an hour a week for 6 weeks isn't going to cut it. And then my last little productivity tip, I guess, is, I mean, I actually have come to be fond of, though it was kind of freaky at first, using like time tracking software, like EverHour. So then you literally get like, you can just pull up your stats and you can be like, well, this week I did 6 hours. And it just like keeps you honest, and it does help with the motivation. There's kind of a saying in the startup world where if you want to improve something, measure it.
Oh yeah.
So making sure you're keeping track of your time spent or what you got done. If you don't want to time track, then, progress track, I think is also pretty helpful too.
Yeah, that's a great point. Tracking is awesome. Any kind of tracking you do will make you better at the thing you track for sure. Just without even trying, which is cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very cool. All right. Thank you, Vince. This has been GRE Snacks, hosted by Tyler from Achievable. You can try out our GRE course for free at achievable.me, and the code podcast will get you 10% off at checkout.